Hello everyone and welcome to a new CAMNES studio video. In this video I'm going to talk about women in ancient Egypt. For instance, do you know that women could also become pharaohs? Before talking about women in society, in religion, in various aspects of everyday life, I would like to start from the very beginning. So, how women were represented, how they were somehow perceived by ancient Egyptians, at least according to ancient Egyptian art, ancient Egyptian iconography. Women were usually represented with a yellowish skin, whereas men were usually shown with a reddish color. We don't know why. Ancient Egyptians decided to make this division, this differentiation between women and men. But among the various hypotheses, it has been suggested that women looked paler than men because they had less exposure to the sun than men. And consequently, men had a sort of tan on their skin, whereas women had this yellowish color because they had to look paler. Other elements that are related to women and how they were represented in Egyptian iconography, of course according to their social stratum, pertains to wigs. Most of the time women are in fact represented with magnificent wigs and also dresses. Even quite peculiar dresses. Sometimes women, in fact, are represented with dresses entirely made of beads, of colorful beads. We know the existence of these kind of clothes because of the images that have been found, of course, but also because proper dresses entirely made of beads have been discovered during the course of the years. A very important thing, a thing that I would like to underline in this video, is the fact that women enjoyed full rights under the law. That's a very important thing, especially if compared to other cultures of the same period. Women were almost equal to men. Not entirely, unfortunately, but almost. They, for instance, could inherit. They could have their own possessions. They were well regarded, generally speaking, of course, but they were not always seen from a positive point of view. Sometimes, in fact, according to texts like wisdom texts or instructions, they were seen in a very negative way. And I would like to read you a passage, a few lines from the instructions of Antiquity. These instructions have been found on a papyrus that can be dated back to the Ptolemaic period, but the content of the instructions can be probably dated earlier. So I'm going to read you these few lines just to give you an idea of how women were sometimes not seen in a very positive way. Let your wife see your wealth, but don't trust her with it. Never confide in your wife. What you say to her goes straight into the street. What she does with her husband today, she will do with another man tomorrow. Luckily, in the same text, there are also passages in which women are seen from a more positive point of view, such as, "A good woman of noble character is food that comes in time of hunger." So, this is just to give you an idea of how women were perceived in society. However, generally speaking, again, women were very important in ancient Egyptian society, but also in ancient Egyptian religion. And in fact, many of the most important deities of the Egyptian pantheon were goddesses, were female deities. Ancient Egyptians worshipped Hathor, Sekhmet, Tauret, but I believe that the most important ones, and the most famous ones as well, were Isis and Maat. Isis is probably the most famous one. She is usually associated to the myth of Isis and Osiris. Osiris was her brother, but also her husband. And Isis became particularly important and famous because she was worshipped even after the conventional end of the ancient Egyptian civilization. So when Egypt became a Roman province, Isis continued to be worshipped because she was somehow associated to Aphrodite and then to Venus, and therefore she continued to be well known, she continued to be famous and worshipped by ancient Romans as well. And in fact, many temples dedicated to this goddess have been built, have been constructed in different parts of the Roman Empire outside Egypt as well. Maat, the other goddess that I want to talk about in this video, is probably the most important deity of the entire Egyptian pantheon, of the entire ancient Egyptian religion. Maat was usually represented as a woman with a feather on her head, or as a feather, so without any human connotation. And she was extremely important because she represents somehow the cosmic order, the truth, the justice, the absolute justice, and the cosmic order that the pharaoh had to maintain during his reign. And in fact, each pharaoh, when they ascended the throne, had to promise that to maintain the Maat during the course of their reign. So the Maat was fundamental not only for the Egyptian religion, but also for the Egyptian society, because she was the foundation of the Egyptian society. Maat is usually associated to an image that belongs to the Book of the Dead, the so-called psychostasia, or waving of the soul or waving of the heart, where the deceased is represented in front of Osiris next to a gigantic scale. On one hand of the scale, the heart of the deceased is placed, whereas on the other part of the scale, an image of Maat or a feather, symbol of Maat, is placed. And then if the heart and the symbol of the cosmic order, the symbol of justice, so the feather, are balanced, then the deceased can reach the afterlife safe and sound. Otherwise, if the heart of the deceased is heavier than the feather, so then the concept of the cosmic order, of justice, of truth, it had to be devoured by the demon Ammit. So apart from religion, I would like again to underline another very important thing that pertains women in ancient Egyptian society, which is the fact that all land property was passed down through female line. That's the reason why men and people in general, when they introduced themselves, they used their mother's name rather than their father's, or at least they use their mother's name before the one of their father. Women could do many different jobs. Probably the most frequent ones were a mourner, musician, dancer, priest, midwife. But as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, women could also become pharaohs. Of course, very few women succeeded and became pharaohs. Probably the most famous one is Hatshepsut, who reigned during the 18th dynasty, and who is famous also because she wanted to be represented with those features that characterized the male power. For instance, the beard. But she was not the only one. Other women became pharaohs. Other women became queen and female pharaohs during the course of the Egyptian history in various moments, in different moments of the Egyptian history. Another aspect that I would like to discuss is love and marriages. In ancient Egypt, most of the marriages probably were arranged, but both men and women could divorce. And among the various reasons behind the divorce, that is a very important thing that I want to stress in this video, women could divorce for physical and or psychological violence. So women could decide to end a marriage for violence, because of violence. After the divorce, both men and women could remarry without any kind of problem. As I said, women could do various jobs, many different jobs, but their main occupations were, of course, wife and mother. And as for what concerns motherhood and pregnancy, of course, this part of the life of a woman were extremely protected by the Egyptian society, also because of a very high infant mortality. And therefore, for instance, there were some deities, some gods and goddesses that were linked to motherhood and to pregnancy and to infantry. And these deities had to protect both mothers and children. But not only religion, but also medicine was fundamental, of course, for pregnancy. And in fact, some medical papyri, in particular gynecological papyri, have been found in Egypt. And the gynecological ones, of course, are related to gynecological issues, various gynecological issues. And I would like to mention a quite peculiar test for pregnancy. A woman is asked to urinate daily onto cloth bags, one filled with emmer wheat and the other with barley. If both germinates, the woman is said to be pregnant. If the barley germinates first, the child is said to be a boy, whereas if the other one germinates first, the child is said to be a girl. Of course, as you can imagine, this is a very general overview on women in ancient Egypt, and therefore, if you want to learn more, I've added a selected bibliography in the description here. And I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you have questions, please write to ask@camnes.org. Thank you so much.
Hi guys, if you want to discover more about archaeology and our ancient past from a different perspective, make sure to click on the CAMNES logo here below. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you will never miss an episode and join the archaeological community in search of the truth.